Hi, my name is Ran Mei. I'm a doctoral student in the Department of Food Studies, Nutrition and Food Studies, and I'm a student of Fabio's. Welcome to our first Feast and Famine event of Fall 2025. It's my honor to introduce you to very distinguished speakers today who will be talking about a very new and exciting book. Professor Fabio Parasacoli is a professor of food studies in the Department of Nutrition and Food Studies at NYU Steinhardt. His research explores cultural politics of food, particularly in media, design, heritage, and international affairs. After studying East Asian cultures and political science in Rome, Naples, Beijing, he earned his doctorate in agricultural sciences at Hohenheim University in Germany. Professor Parasacoli has had a remarkable career spanning journalism and academia. He spent many years as the U.S. correspondent for Gambero Rosso, Italy's authoritative food and wine magazine. After covering Middle and Far Eastern political issues, his research has taken him across the globe, from Costa Rica and India to China, Brazil, Spain, Italy, and now today, Poland. He has collaborated on numerous food-related exhibitions with prestigious institutions including the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, the Museum of the City of New York, and the Museum Fashion Institute of Technology. Professor Parasacoli is also the author of several award-winning books, including Global Brooklyn, Designing Food Experience in World Cities, published by Bloomsbury 2021. Gastronativism, Food, Identity, and Politics, published by Columbia University Press, 2022. And most recently, well, actually not the most recently now, Practicing Food Studies by New York University Press, 2024. And secondly, but not lastly, Professor Barbara Kirschenblatt-Gimblett is the University Professor Emerita of Performance Studies at New York University, where she taught the graduate seminar Food and Performance for many years. She currently serves as Ronald S. Lauder Chief Curator for the core exhibition at the Poland Museum of the History of Polish Jews in Warsaw. In her prolific career, Professor Kirschenblatt-Gimblett has published many field-shaping books, including Destination Culture, Tourism, Museums, and Heritage, published by University of California Press in 1998, and Frank Unbound, Media, Imagination, Memory, published by Indiana University Press in 2012, and The Art of Being Jewish in Modern Times, published by University of Pennsylvania Press 2013. Her contribution to scholarship has been recognized with numerous prestigious awards, including the 2021 Lifetime Achievement Awards from the American Folklore Society, the Marshall Clare Award in 2015, and she was honored for Lifetime Achievement by the Foundation for Jewish Culture. She was also decorated with the Officer's Cross of the Order of Merit by Republic of Poland. As a curator, she has advised on museums and exhibition projects across Lithuania, Belarus, Albania, Israel, New Zealand, and the United States. So tonight, our speakers will be discussing Professor Parasacoli's latest work, The Pierogi Problem, Cosmopolitan Appetites and the Reinvention of Polish Food, published this summer by University of California Press. This fascinating book, co-authored with Agata Bakush at the University of Gdansk, and Mateusz Halawa at the Polish Academy of Sciences, explores the complex intersections of food, identity, and globalization in contemporary Polish culture. Before we begin, we would like to thank Bartek Remisko and Jakub Szwelik, the new director of the Polish Culture Institute, New York, for collaborating with us on this event, as well as the Steinhardt Communication Offices for providing video recording services. For those interested in purchasing the book, copies will be available for sale after the talk. You can pay by cash or Venmo. And for your convenience, restrooms are located down the hall or outside in the elevator lobby. So before further ado, join me for welcoming our distinguished speakers as they share their insight on this very important and timely work.
Well, thank you everybody for coming. I also want to thank, first of all, Ran and everybody in the department, Jenny Berg, our chair, for helping me organize this event, for hosting everybody here. It's an amazing pleasure. Again, the Polish Cultural Institute. And I also want to thank the Institute of Philosophy and Sociology at the Polish Academy of Sciences, of which I am a fellow. They've been my academic home away from home from years, and they really supported also practically my research when I was in Poland for some time. So before we go into the conversation, and I know that Barbara will have very interesting questions about the topic, as you know, Barbara is a very, very important scholar. She works in Poland. She has worked in Poland for quite a while now. And actually, I ended up working on Poland because she gave my name to the Adam Mickiewicz Institute that was organizing a trip to explore Polish food. And that was the beginning of everything back in 2016. So it's also like a very nice moment to have you here. And it's such an honor at any rate. So before we go into our conversation, I've prepared a few slides to introduce the topic and also explain a little bit the kind of work we've done. And of course now, oh, here we go. So these are the pierogis of which, you know, from which the book has its title. Why the pierogi problem? That actually was told us by Tomasz Duda, who was the chef at the Polish embassy in London a few years ago. We were there to present our work, and after our chat we were talking, and it was like, you know, I think we have a pierogi problem because we have such a rich and varied gastronomy, and people just know pierogi, maybe kiełbasa. And so we liked that sentence, the pierogi problem, and we decided to use it for our title, precisely to highlight this irony of a very complex cuisine reduced to one dish. Why these two pictures? Because this is pierogis now. You can see, you know, the domestic pierogi prepared very simply in large quantities. And then you might go to an upscale restaurant and be served one pierogi, but presented in a very interesting way with amazing ingredients. And I think this is really symbolic of the phenomenon we study in this book, how Poland in a very, very short time has changed economically, has changed socially. As you might know, Poland is the EU country with the highest rate of development. They're around 4, the rest of us it's like 1. So that already tells you something. It's a big country with a big population. Recently, because of international events, and also come to the fore in many ways. But what we were interested in is to see how traditional Polish food has been transformed by a group of people that we define as tastemakers, chefs, journalists, producers, that are sort of looking around in the world and see how food and traditional foods are considered in the world, how they're talked about, how they're represented. And they've been doing that in Poland. But of course, you know, Poland has its own history, its own tradition, so it is becoming a very interesting, unique culinary landscape. This is also very symbolic of what's happening. This is a potato, and this is a vodka, młody ziemniak, which means a young potato. But it's not your run-of-the-mill vodka. It's, as you can see, it's got a specific year, where it was made. So suddenly, a product that was considered sort of everyday drinking, now it's turned into something refined, something that is very connected with their place of origin, and also something that is served and tasted in a different way. So you go to a bar, and you would have the bartender that explains to you about this vodka, why it's different, and how you should taste it to get the most out of it. This is the kind of dishes that now you can enjoy in many Polish restaurants, beautifully prepared, but also very Instagrammable. So it's clear that a great number of chefs is realizing how the global circulation of gastronomy, of images, practices, and taste is taking place. And they want to be part of that. So you can see, for instance, the changes that are happening. These are farmers' markets that are actually beautiful, designed wonderfully, and these are the places where, you know, sort of the young foodies would go and get their organic food, their quality food. It's a little more expensive than the food you would find in a normal store, but consumers now have this choice, you know, which are also, and Barbara is here, different performances of identity. Shopping for cabbage here, it's not the same thing as shopping for cabbage, you know, in the stall on the side of the street, which still exists, and it thrives. It's not like the old world has disappeared, and that makes the situation very interesting. Meat, you can see a butcher called Butcher. And you know, there is a lot of interest about different cuts, different ways of preparing meat, and you have experts, young people, that decide that it's worth pursuing a career as butchers, or in gastronomy in general. And this is also a big social change. Until a few years ago, cooking and food was something manual, was something of the people. Now you can express your refinement, your cultural capital, through work in food. You have places like this. These are beautiful coffee houses in Warsaw. I spent a lot of time in Warsaw, so I had the opportunity to explore quite a bit. These are cafes like we could find anywhere in Brooklyn. And actually, they became also partly the topic of my other book, Global Brooklyn. Actually, the idea of the Global Brooklyn was born in Warsaw, because we were seeing this, and it was like, hold on, am I still, where am I? You know, it was quite interesting. But of course, then you have the fantastic posters. As you might know, Poland has a very important tradition in graphic design and posters, so you can see that as Warsaw. These are places that are becoming popular. On the right, you can see an abandoned train station that it's now become a Nocny Targ. Sorry, I'm getting a little confused with the word. Well, it's a night market, but actually it's sort of a party where you can go and drink, sometimes you can dance, and there are places like that all over Poland. In Poznan, I remember I was in an abandoned warehouse that had been transformed into that. In Danzig, in, you know, where they used to make ships, now you can go and have drinks right on the water. Some parts of the yards are still functional and industrial, but some parts are there for leisure. And these are some of the people I interacted with, and over time they're also becoming quite friendly. You have Andrea Camastra. Actually he's an Italian, but he has a 1 Michelin star restaurant in Warsaw. Alex Baron, who's one of the most innovative, in my opinion, interesting chefs. Jeno Mięckiewicz, who's the cheese expert of Poland, and actually he invited me to be one of the signatories of the Twaróg manifesto a few years ago. They decided that Twaróg, which is this sort of a fresh white cheese, needed to be elevated, need to be put under the attention of the public, and so they created a manifesto, and they kindly asked me to become part of that initiative. Sorry. You have, among the tastemakers, you have professionals that decide to change careers. And so here you have the two women behind Strong Oitzkowski, which is near Kraków. They make the most amazing smoked trout, but more interestingly, they have reintroduced a variety of trout that was disappearing. And so there is this work of rediscovering the sort of the material tradition of the place while offering a really high quality product. And on the right, you have the owners of Mleczna Droga, which means the Milky Way. It's a dairy farm that produces really good cheese and yogurt, and interestingly, Stilton. That was one of the first products that they had us taste, because they were so proud of the Stilton that they were making. But they were lawyers, and one of the owners of the trout place was an executive in IT. So it is becoming a possibility to quit your day job, or your job, period, and move to the countryside and become a producer. And that comes with social recognition. It's not a plan B. It becomes a plan A plus in a way. Design plays a huge role. These are pictures we took in Folwark, Pasowo. It's a farm, organic farm near Poznan. And you can see all the details are really well worked, from the branding of the products, to the design of the restaurant, to their Instagram. In all this, design plays a big role because it sort of elevates the experience for the consumer. They are aware that they are taking advantage of something new, something cool, something that has value. There is a whole new wine industry coming out of nothing, because there was no more wine produced in Poland until a few years ago. And people started getting into it. When I was there back in 2016, I remember a wine producer telling me, oh yeah, I learned on YouTube how to make wine. But from 2016 till now, the development of the industry has been really fast. And so now you can go to a Polish restaurant and order Polish wine, which might be more expensive than European wines because the production is still limited. But people enjoy it. They're proud of the fact that there's wine now. Also partly due to climate change, of course. At the beginning, they had to use engineered varieties coming from Germany. And now in many places, it's possible to grow Cabernet or Merlot or, varieties from the south. One element that is quite interesting is trying to reconnect with the history of gastronomy of Poland. This was an event in Lublin to celebrate a famous treaty that united Poland and Lithuania like in the 16th century, where they went back and studied historical books, thanks to the work of Jarosław Iwanowski, a professor of history in Torun. And the chefs engaged with these old recipes, with the different flavors, with the spices, and then they presented, the result of their work. On the right is Maciej Nowicki. He used to be the chef at Wilanów, at the Wilanów Palace. It's sort of a Versailles in Warsaw. And they have a garden where they are basically trying to grow all the plants that were mentioned in these historical books. And they organize events for the general public so that anybody can rediscover the past of Polish cuisine. Sometimes the relationship with history is a little muddled, let's say. So there is a whole genre called Kuchnia Staropolska, which is old Polish cooking, which is basically based on books that came out in the 1970s that were reimagining the peasantry cooking from before the war. And you can also go to karczmas, which are these sort of roadside restaurants. You can see the decoration, it's quite peculiar. You have traditional food also in very large quantities. So there is a reappropriation of history that is quite different from what we've seen before. You have new versions of Milky Bars, which were a very important institution during socialism. There were places where cheap meals, but tasty and well-done meals were available for many years. Now there is a new generation of Milky Bars that take sort of the inspiration, but as you can see, they are very much designed. The food is not what you would eat. In the old Milky Bars that still exist, once again, the two realities are there. And this is something that struck me. There is a restaurant called Setka that basically copied the logo of the old Polish People's Party from socialism. So there is a big dose of hipster irony, also in the way in which the past is being re-examined. That said, great traditions are still there. Foraging for mushrooms and berries, it's still very popular. Smoked fish, personally, it's one of the things I love the most. There, nalewki, which are fruits and berries left in alcohol and sugar until they become this homemade liquor. They are in sort of gray zones. Some producers are actually registered. The majority of nalewki are homemade, but nevertheless, there are competitions, regional competitions and national competitions. I actually was invited to be a judge in a couple of them. I'll tell you a little bit more because it was an interesting experience. And then there are sort of institutions connected with socialism that are still there but have changed meaning. On the left you can see a działka, which is sort of a little urban allotment where people used to grow food because they needed food. Now they have become a mark of having connections because they are so difficult to come by. And people don't really produce food there. They are there to enjoy. Maybe they do produce food, but the goal is leisure in many cases. On the right, you can see the famous słoiki, which literally means jars. And those in the past were a sign of connection with the countryside. And in the past, maybe your grandmother would send you products that she would make. And now they are embraced as a mark of authenticity. I still have my babcia, my grandmother, making food for me. But then you have the version by Alex Baron, the chef I mentioned before. A few years ago, he had an amazing restaurant called Solec 44, where he experimented with fermentations wildly, because he's an artist at heart, and so he goes you know, he can go a little crazy. But it was really, really interesting food. So once again, you have the fermentation made at home and a young, innovative chef using fermentation. Of course, because of this, food cannot be isolated from politics. Actually, I wrote about this in my book, Gastronativism. On the left, you can see Newsweek saying the meat problem of Poles. On the right, it's who wants to stop us from eating meat? And it's a new craziness of the left. So even something as simple as meat has become sort of the object of these sort of political debates. I don't know, Polish politics can be quite intense. There were elections a couple of years ago that changed government, but the tensions are still there. And I would like to finish with, you know, what it meant to do research in Poland. I found myself being invited as a judge in competition of food that I had no idea about. But it didn't matter. Actually, it was, for the organizer, it was interesting to hear the point of view of somebody that didn't grow up with that food and see if the flavors, the style, the quality could measure up with what happens in the rest of the world. So you can see the nalewka tasting, pierogi tasting, czarnina tasting. It's duck blood soup. I found myself gathering potatoes, and in a magazine, I also got a portrait, as you can see, which is, when I saw it, I laughed for like 2 months. But it was a very interesting process, also because I was working with Polish researchers. And we have a whole appendix in the book about this. What does it mean for a foreigner coming from the US, but Italian, and a fast food critic to work in Poland with Polish scholars that maybe don't get the recognition they would like for working about food. And there were, you know, sort of career differences. For many people, it was weird that I was working as a peer with people that were my juniors, career-wise. There was a woman, anyway. It was quite interesting, but this is the result. So we started in 2016, and it came out just now. It took some time. And that's it, and now I'm curious to hear what Barbara has to say about the book.
Okay. Well, first of all, Fabio, thank you so much for this opportunity. I am very honored to be here, and full disclosure, I love the book.
Oh.
Let's get that clear. Now, I want to tell you why. So, it's really the first serious book about Polish food in the English language. The only other one was published many, many years ago on food in medieval Poland. So from medieval Poland, and this is a wonderful Maria Dębicka, to looking at literally, this is a kind of a snapshot of this moment in Polish culinary culture. It's extraordinary. So that's the first thing. It's the first serious book in the English language other than Food of the Middle Ages in Poland, and I think for that reason, if for no other, I think it's really important. But the second is that I think of it as actually a model of food studies. It's multidisciplinary, it's collaborative, and it is so multifaceted. I mean, as you can tell from Fabio's presentation, is that it's covering all the bases. And there's a much more in the book than, of course, Fabio could present today, because there's a lot in the book also about, if you will, what I would call heritage practices. I mean, it's there, but what's wonderful about the book is that it is theoretically very rich, and, which is just warms my heart, it's ethnographic. So, coming to this really as a folklorist, an ethnographer, an anthropologist, this is qualitative, on the ground, field research, ethnographic, with close attention to real people in their everyday lives, and what it is they're actually doing. And the other thing is that it comes at it not simply in terms of the foods, the dishes, but it comes at it in terms of a kind of re-educating of the senses, in terms of the materiality of food practices in relationship to the body, in relationship to tools, in relationship to materials. So it is so rich in the way in which food is being thought about at this particular moment in Poland. So I love all of that. Now, very disappointing for many of you, this book is not about pierogi. You may have come thinking that it was about pierogi, and then in social media when we announced it, people were saying, pierogi the problem, it's the solution. So I have a question we have to get out of the way. Okay, it's not about pierogi. Pierogi is the problem. But my question is, but why has pierogi assumed this status? It's not something you deal with in the book.
So it has assumed the status of symbol of Poland, I think mostly due to the diaspora, the Polish diaspora around the world. And it's one of those family dishes, dishes that speak about community, speak about tradition. So it totally makes sense for Poles abroad to maintain some of those traditions, and pierogi became maybe the most visible. And somehow it's a preparation that it's quite readable across cultures. I remember I moved here to the US in 1998, and I lived in the East Village on 7th Street. By the way, I come from Rome. I opened my windows and there was a bust of John Paul II in front of the Polish church on 7th Street, but that's another story. In that area, there were small mom and pop stores where people would make pierogis by hand and sell it. The East Village was very much Polish and Ukrainian. And that was my first exposure to Polish food, I must say. And already back then, pierogi had been somehow adopted as cultural symbols, but had also been embraced by New Yorkers as something tasty, as something that fills you up, as something that is understandable. So I think somehow what they're feeling now in Poland is that, you know, the chefs, the producers would like the spotlight also on other dishes, on other traditions.
Okay, so there's so many other iconic foods. You know, it could have been borscht. I mean, if you talked, you know, Ukraine, I think the first thing that will come to mind is probably borscht, rather than pierogi. But they have their vareniki and they have their versions. But I mean, we can't. How can I say? I think the problem, obviously, is the reduction of all of Polish cuisine to this one iconic food. That clearly is, quote, the problem. And I think it's interesting that you take the term from its articulation by the guy at the embassy. Yeah. You know, so that in a sense, that gives it, I would say, a pedigree. Mm-hmm. That gives it a certain cachet. So, you know, I was thinking that one of the themes of the book has to do, well, with a question that's often posed to you. So let me pose it to you because I think it'll be of interest, and that is the book about Polish food or about food in Poland?
Okay, that was a very interesting conversation that I started having when I first was starting doing research in Poland. And I used it as a provocation for chefs and scholars, like, what is Polish food? Can we talk about Polish food? Does that exist? Or are we talking about food in Poland? And this is an important distinction because, as you might know, Poland has changed a lot in the past 100 years in terms of the land that it includes. So there were parts of Poland that now are part of Belarus, of Lithuania, of Ukraine. They are part of Germany that are now Polish. So there was this sort of this location geographically that was also accompanied by internal migrations. And so what does it mean to have Polish food? How does that come up? And many of the tastemakers we talked to, they would like to sort of expand the idea of Polish food. So there is a whole embrace of Polish Jewish food that had, let's say, not set aside because people eat it, but not recognized as specifically Jewish heritage. Or there is interest in Tatar cuisine because there are Tatar groups in the north, Kashubski, so ethnic minorities in the north. There is the desire among these tastemakers. I wouldn't say that it's among the whole population, but among these people, they would like to see the articulation of Polish food, the connection with the world. I've heard so many times that the sentence from the Baltic to the Black Sea, which was the extension of Poland during the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which meant it was in the middle, for instance, of the spice trade. Dishes were much spicier. So there is all these elements that I think are being, I wouldn't say rediscovered, but rediscussed.
So, I've been thinking a lot about this because, let me put it another way. There's a very nice passage in the introduction about what you are not going to do in this book. And for me, that's a strength of the book. So let me just share this with our audience. That is, this book will not be about what is originally, uniquely, and authentically Polish cuisine. Yes. But it will be about how and why this question animates the culinary cultural field in Poland. Why delineating a Polish national cuisine has become a priority. That's interesting. So it's the question that's interesting, not the definition.
Yes.
It's not about defining what is authentically, originally, and uniquely Polish, but rather it's about why do people care, how do they go about thinking about it, asserting it, creating canons, recreating designated appellations, and taking all of these steps, and in a way, and I want to come to this, in a way, it is the tension between imagining a national cuisine as one cuisine versus a very particular kind of diversity in Poland, where one could say that today the cuisine is more diverse than the population. And I wonder if you'd like to comment on that.
Oh yeah, that's, I think, the desire of tastemakers to point out this articulation. It's very important. There is the sense that Poland is very uniform ethnically. And for these people, it's not a problem, but it's something that diminishes the possibilities of what Poland could be. But then, if you start looking at actors that maybe belong to a more conservative political space, then the question of identifying the essence, the unchanging essence of Polish cuisine becomes quite important. I was even in conversations with the Ministry of Agriculture when they decided to start the project of the canon of Polish cuisine. And in my conversation, I pointed out that the idea of canon is not exactly reflecting, what most people think about heritage. For instance, at the UNESCO, there is this idea of something rigid, something belongs, some doesn't. It doesn't change. But at that moment, for them, it was important to start this process of identifying this kernel, this unchanging essence of Polish cuisine. So I did not participate in the project, but many of the actors that might have also different political ideas did embrace it, because it was the first time that the national government was looking at food and food traditions in that way, and that became very important to them.
But they were looking at dishes, not
They
at
were looking
cultural,
at dishes.
and not looking at, this is what you point out in
Yeah.
the book, and not looking at cultural practices,
Yeah.
meaning, significance.
Yeah, it was just identifying this dish yes, this dish no, this dish yes.
Essentially kind of like a cookbook, you
Yeah.
know, of recipes, basically, which is a much, I would say, very diminished way of thinking. So, I think, when I think about Poland today, I think of the post-war period as a period where, a period of the creation of mono-ethnic states, basically. And a period, with the Holocaust, Jews basically disappear, except for a relatively small, I mean, there were 3,300,000 Jews in Poland, 90% of them were murdered. Today, there are tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands, but not 3,300,000. So you have a whole population and its entire culinary culture vanishes with them. But at the same, so essentially mono-ethnic except for this influx of Ukrainians and also Vietnamese. Vietnamese, the biggest immigrant group other than the recent, this is from the 70s, it's from communist Vietnam, it's like another whole story. So, but I think, when I think about diversity, I think of it in a couple of ways. And one of them is, and this is very much a topic you take up in the book, has to do with thinking about regional. And thinking about regional in two ways. One, internal to the borders of Poland today, and one, regional that escapes the borders. Because so much of the culinary culture that we associate with Poland, and I don't mean it as a unitary culture, but so much of whatever it is trans-regional. I mean, or it's transnational, or it's regional in the sense of ethnographic regions, not regions within a political entity. So I think, and when I think about it, there's another whole conversation, but the best example I can think of is gefilte fish, but we'll leave that for another conversation, because what you have is you actually have minority groups that have their own ethnographic regional configurations. But, and this is something you deal with, what is so interesting is that historically, the territory of Poland today is made up of parts of the country that were once, for almost 120 plus years, part of the Austrian Empire, the Russian Empire, and the Kingdom of Prussia. And that has actually created a kind of historical, historical diversity. And I mean, maybe you would want to comment on that.
So, the fact that the country was basically dismembered, it was divided in three parts and attributed to the nearby empires, has had a huge impact on the economic and social development of these different regions. And of course, that had an impact on how the food system developed in these different regions. So there is this element. On top of that, then there has been the attempt during the socialist times to create sort of a diet that was not connected with regions, because so many people had been moved around, but it was focused on the fact that everybody needed to have enough to eat, which was a huge advancement, because for centuries, Polish farmers were not well nourished. So you have all these different layers, but now you have the desire of rediscovering regional traditions. And there are still elements of that. But the way they are being reconfigured is very much also influenced by how the global culinary discourse talks about regionality. It's a mark of authenticity. It's a mark of quality. And that's what the tastemakers, the chef producers, the media personalities are trying to do right now.
Well, you know, it's also interesting because during the period of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, so 1569 to 1795, this Commonwealth was the largest country in Europe and perhaps the most diverse. And it was because it encompassed not only Poland, Ukraine, Belarus, Lithuania, Latvia, parts of Russia, and in a sense, and it was diverse in terms of religion, culture, and in every other way. So that, but I think what you've expressed here and what the book does is to capture the degree to which some of that diversity actually persists in the, well, not only, basically persists in Poland today. Okay, so now let me go to something that, well, let's do this. I'm interested in how the book deals with tradition. So I have my favorite bugaboo, and that is Hobsbawm, and Eric Hobsbawm and Terence Ranger wrote a very, very influential book a long time ago called The Invention of Tradition. And the idea is that there are claims to, there are practices today, and there are claims that they are very old traditions. And the best example they give, which I really like, is that, and they say that the modern Scottish tartan and kilt don't go back centuries as claimed, but were invented in the 19th century. Great, but what's the problem with this model? And the problem with this model is that it's all about debunking. It's about debunking claims to tradition that have no historical basis, and of course, to their credit, they're very interested in why, to what end, and with what impact. Now, no doubt there are invented traditions in exactly the way that Hobsbawm and Ranger think about it. But something profound is totally missing from a kind of debunking approach to these practices. I'm not sure what would be, I'd be interested actually, what are some of the invented traditions? Can you think of ones for Poland?
I think the fact of projecting back in time, for instance, the fact that meat is central in Polish cuisine, and we know historically that that's not the case because very few people had access to meat. But those political discussions I was mentioning are based on the assumption that Poles have always had access to meat, and you have to have meat to have a meal. Well, if you think already in the 70s, we know very well that that was not the case.
But also, you point out that, and certainly in the early modern period, and presumably the Middle Ages as well, that the number of fasting days,
Yes.
I mean, people were fasting all the time. So, that definitely, I think, supports what you're saying. So, what I would propose as an alternative to this, I think, cynical approach to tradition is to think, and here I'm inspired very much, and you mentioned this earlier, by UNESCO's Intangible Heritage Initiative with all of its problems, and we know it's got a lot of problems, but I would propose that heritage is a mode of cultural production that produces something new that has recourse to the past. But it's not about making false claims and debunking them. That there's something creative going on here, and there's a process here which I think requires a different lens. I don't know whether you...
No, absolutely. Actually, we quote your work on this in the book because we totally agree on that. It's a creative moment that somehow responds to situations in the present. Why is tradition important? Why are we even talking about that? Why is it valuable? For us, that's the important element. And then, yes, it might be invented, but that doesn't mean that it's not important for the identity of people, for the emotional relationship that people have to food, and the case of meat. I think it really demonstrates it. So absolutely, I agree with that. The debunking in itself doesn't bring anything. The interesting question is, why has this invented tradition being embraced? Why is it so valuable? What do people find in it? And I think in the book we try to look at that. We divided the book in a very strange ways, in many ways. So we have a chapter about people, one about place, one about time, and one about materiality. And it's how food is reconfigured in all these dimensions. And in the chapter about time, that's where
Exactly. I guess what I'm trying to get at is that I don't think, when I think of heritage as a mode of cultural production, I don't think of it as inventing traditions, but rather a way of a whole set of practices involving traditions, basically, but where, say, something that would be taken for granted is now, in a sense, been elevated as tradition. It hasn't been invented. It has been, if you will, elevated, elaborated, protected, made the focus of a museum, of a festival, of some other way. Okay, but now I found that the chapter on place really interesting, and I really liked the approach, which was not so much about place as such, but about place making. And I wondered if you'd want to say something about that.
Yeah, we realized that placemaking can play at different scales. So we saw, for instance, Poland was an important scale, the nation, and above all, the nature within this country. So there are lots of chefs and producers that are sort of scouting out Poland, trying to rediscover plant varieties, animal breeds, dishes that are not there. But the scale is the nation. And then you have the regions, as we discussed, you have cities, which in Polish culture are very important. Kraków has got its own identity, Warsaw's got its own, Gdańsk has got its own. So it's very interesting of how each of these articulations at different scales are overlapping and working together towards creating this varieties and this richness that these actors in the gastronomy field want to highlight.
So I want to share a story.
Okay.
So I've been involved with Polin Museum of the History of Polish Jews since, in a very minimal way, since maybe 2002. And then eventually I pretty much moved to Poland. And for reasons I can't remember now, I wanted to buy prunes. So I went to Halamarowska, this wonderful market, and it is exactly, I think, Fabio, you really capture it, because it really shows how some of these, there's old school markets are still going, and people drive up with their cars, they back them up to the sidewalk, they open up the trunk, and then they've got their like granny squares that they've crocheted, and they've got the eggs from their chooks, and etc. Okay, so I'm going around the market, I'm looking for prunes, and at this point my Polish was even more rudimentary than it is now, and I noticed that all the prunes seemed to be from California, and I didn't want prunes from California. So the only prunes I could see that were from California, I'll tell you in a moment what they were. I assumed, well, they're not from California, but I don't know where they're from, and they were Śliwki Krajowe. I had no idea. I thought Krajowe was a country. I didn't know what it was. Those of you who know Polish will appreciate what that means. So I bring them home. Well, I bring all my shopping home. I bring home, wonderful produce and whatever. And, I think to myself, what am I smelling? Something really smoky. I have no idea what this is. So I go through my stuff, and it's the prunes. I said, prunes? Smoky? So then I discovered that what Krajowe means, it means local. It means here, our country. It's not like, another country, like Russia or something. Fine. Then I start to look into it, and then I discovered, which was for me an absolute revelation, there are now 2 towns in Poland that have gotten like a special designation for their prunes because of the way in which they are dried, and the way in which they're dried smokes them. In other words, they don't smoke them, they dry them, and the drying process smokes them. And it turns out that in the case of a town very, very near my father's town, the town of Zidlov, that one of the people in the town remembers that it was a Jewish specialty from before the war, and that the Jews who were drying this fruit actually taught it to the Poles, who then continued it using the same, pardon me, and then, of course, since then, other technology. So, all of a sudden, these beautiful, shiny, big, succulent, smoked prunes, they became so important to me. I can't even begin to tell you, like, they will stay with me in my memory forever. So, I mean, I think that this goes exactly to your argument in the book, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I had a similar experience with a jam that they make with these prunes. And it needs to be cooked very slowly so that it takes this smokiness. There are certain flavors and certain smells that I immediately connect with that food. And unfortunately, the focus being so much on dishes and preparations, these techniques, these practices, who prepares that, it's sort of not looked at in the way I think it should.
Well, and your book does that, because I think what struck me as I looked further into this story was that it's all about orchards. And my father remembers that Jews would rent an orchard and there would be a hut, and that my father even had to spend nights there in order to make sure that nobody stole the fruit. And that it was a kind of specialty, so that all of a sudden, and they talk about how the aroma of all the fruit that was being dried would waft over the entire town during this period. So all of a sudden, it's like a whole universe. It isn't just a dish or a food. But this brings me to a very interesting chapter in your book, which is about the senses. Mm-hmm. And maybe you want to say something about how you deal with that.
Yeah, we wanted to look at how this sensory element, these embodied elements, are also being reworked towards the redesign of Polish food. The attention to smokiness, the attention to these liquors. But there is also an attempt at reshaping landscapes, which is very interesting. Wine is one of the examples. Bringing back trout is another example. So it's not only sort of the discursive elements, how people talk about food or think about food, but there are really attempts at changing the soil to a certain extent, or making the soils do different things. There is a lot of attention towards fermentation. Now, sourdough bread is extremely popular. And there are people that go around Poland teaching the newer generations how to do that. Interestingly enough, they all have learned how to make that kind of bread at home during the socialist years. So in a way, this period that very often is demonized as the time where all traditions were killed, in reality had been an incubator of the traditions and the practices that we see today. But these attentions to fermentation, so cheese making, these nalewki liquors, all these elements have a very specific way of creating a category of taste that can be easily recognizable. At least for me as a foreigner coming there, and for that it was interesting to work with two Poles that were much more attuned to that. And so we had lots of exchanges about what does Polish food taste like to you compared to what it tastes like to me, and we try to translate this conversation also.
Well, I think what I liked so much about the chapter on materiality and the senses was the idea that these, and first of all, tastemaker is a core concept in this book, and it's very clear also from your presentation. These are real agents in this culinary world. And one of the things they're doing is, I would say, educating the senses, making them more discerning, more open, and really enlarging, not only enlarging sensory experience, but also in the ability to discern, and also to develop a language for talking about those experiences. That's really new.
Yeah, I saw that happening in the Nalewki contests, because it's a very homey, very common drink, but there was no specific language to talk about it, and also to judge it. When it's bad, when it's good, what are the characteristics of the good ones? And I saw this conversation taking place because they were also thinking, well, we can talk like that about wine, about beer. Why can't
Nalewki.
Nalewki? So they do this, but that also creates sort of a barrier to entry to people that do not own that language. And so you have a category of experts that are redefining categories of taste, but then lots of people are kept at the margins of that.
Right, and you actually, I think that the one of the strengths of the book is looking at issues of class, of, I would say, what you call food wars, which are very interesting. So let me go to my last question, then I would like to open it up for discussion. And there was a very interesting term, omnivorous culinary cosmopolitanism. It's a good term. It's a very, very good term. Omnivorous culinary, let's say cosmopolitans. It's a good term, but there's another term that, how can I say, I don't like it.
Okay.
Foodie. No. So, I went to the OED. I decided, let's get to the bottom of this. Where does this term come from, and why don't I like it? So, according to the OED, the term foodie first appears, now of course, they don't know if it first appears, they just haven't looked hard enough, but let's say it first appears in 1980 in New York Magazine, of course. It's you know, muzzle tough, so it's slang, it's colloquial, and it is defined as a person with a particular interest in food, semicolon, a gourmet, not the same thing at all, sometimes distinguished from gourmet, thank you, as implying a broad interest in all aspects of food procurement and preparation. But why? I don't like it because I think it trivializes serious interest in food. And I understand that this term now has a pedigree because it has been given theoretical and analytical power. I can't believe it.
And by Canadians.
Oh, that's even worse. And I am a Canadian, in case you didn't know.
So there's this book called Foodie.
I know.
That has become sort of a very important book in food sociology. And so it has become a concept with a pedigree and has specific meanings. This element of omnivorism is very important. So if you are in the know, you are a connoisseur, you can go from the lowbrow to the highbrow and know the little mom and pop's place, but also be comfortable, one Michelin star. And not everybody has got the cultural capital to do that. So there is this impression of democratization. Oh, I can eat low, I can eat high. But in reality, it's recreating distinctions between those who can afford to do that culturally and socially and those who do not feel comfortable. Hence, our use of the term.
Yeah, no, but actually, I really, the idea that sort of the, I think it's the freshness of this idea of the omnivorous, let's see, let me go back to it, the omnivorous culinary cosmopolitan. I think it's just the freshness of the term, that it doesn't immediately conjure up somebody who all they want to do is eat. I mean, for me, the foodie thing is it starts with the eating, and then maybe it has, you know, and then I think for some, obviously, or for many, it has all kinds of other dimensions and interests and, you know, et cetera. But okay, so I think maybe with that, let's open it up for questions. Leonard.
So many. I have a question which sort of started in one direction in my own head, and then I realized it moves in a way to this matter of whether cosmopolitan or regionalistic. But it's about pierogi or pierogi. If you go away from the particular and say empanadas, crepe la ravioli, you know, the internationalizing question is to say why? What is the magic of putting, you know, some shop meat inside a piece of dough? And you know, it's actually opposite of localism. It's something universal. I forgot about quote. We could spend the afternoon.
I think at the same time, it's the particular expression of a universal practice, which is to put stuff in a dough. And so, because it's so universal, the differences and the peculiarities of that specific, I don't know, the pierogi as opposed to the vareniki, which are next door, becomes much more important. Because without those little differences, it would be the same thing.
Why does everybody have this, though?
Because I think it's a pretty easy, you know, you put flour, any kind of flour, not just with flour and water, you have a dough and you have stuff that you can put inside. I think that exists exactly as you were pointing out in many cultures. It can be baked, it can be fried, it can be boiled, it can be different kind of flours. But it's one of those preparations, like the idea of, you know, pizza versus lahmacun versus a Chinese. Exactly. Why? And there are certain things that are recurring all over the world because I think they're pretty straightforward ways of diversifying ingredients that otherwise would be quite boring.
You know, it's the opposite of localism. I mean, to take note of this.
At the same time, it allows for localism.
Absolutely.
Because of,
Right,
yeah.
because it has a, yeah.
Yeah.
There have been home books written on dumplings around the world and, you know, whatever, trying to find a word for it. But kind of playing with that, I just thought I'd share this fun moment at the Feast of San Gennaro last week, which is in Little Italy, which abuts Chinatown. There was a booth selling Italian-filled wonton. That's exactly what they call it.
I missed that.
I ate it, and it was, my daughter and I had a good laugh and ate it.
Yeah, please.
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Hi. I was wondering if you could say something about gender, because pierogi or pierogi historically were made by women, and there is a whole notion of skills that is produced and transferred from one generation to the next. And the extent to which women are prepared for marriage or for carrying on their domestic duties. And in addition to that, what happens when you take this domestic dish that requires very moderate meats, because it could be filled not necessarily with meat, or just a little bit of meat, an onion and cabbage, and you bring it to the culinary sphere and serve it in restaurants. If there's anything about that.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. So first of all, grandmothers are sort of the goddesses, at least rhetorically, of Polish cuisine. Everybody refers to their own grandmothers. It's one of the first Polish words I learned because it was mentioned so often in interviews that it sort of stuck in my head. So there is the awareness that these practices are really connected with domestic traditions and women's traditions. Even the big chefs that now interpret pierogis in their restaurants still make reference to their grandmothers. Oh, I've learned how to make the dough this well because that was my grandmother that did it like that.
Which is also very universal, because it's probably Palestinian cuisine.
Oh yeah,
Italian.
it's everywhere. But what's happening now, it's when pierogis goes from the kitchen table, the domestic kitchen table, to the two Michelin star restaurant, they're being transformed in terms of the quality of the flour, the quality of the fillings, and they're very eager in serving you less pierogis because at home you would get them out. So what you're having at the restaurant, having 2 or 3 pierogis or 1 in a dish, it's meant to draw your attention to how different that pierogi is, while at the same time embracing this long tradition.
Thank you.
Yeah, please. The gentleman? Yeah.
So I spent some time with some of these omnivorous culinary cosmopolitans in Poland, and I found this tension between wanting to correct for the communist influence on the cuisine and kind of go back before communism. And an example would be cream sauce on stuffed cabbage, as opposed to the sweet sour tomato sauce. But also this desire to elevate and celebrate some of these beloved communist classics. I'm curious if you can speak to the lingering influence of communism, or how some of these chefs and tastemakers are reckoning with the past.
Actually, I have an article that I wrote with Agata that's coming out on the New Lines magazine soon about this topic. There are many, many elements that are rooted in the dietary and nutritional habits that developed during the socialist years. But sometimes there is a difficulty in acknowledging them because those were the bad years. So there are desserts that are still very popular that started in those years, cheese brands that started in those years, and everybody loves them. And let's say there is the intellectual knowledge of the connection with socialism, but also the emotional desire of separating it. And to do that, very often they are referred to pre-socialist traditions. So what the socialist factory did is just taking a pre-existing recipe and mass produce it, which is still what you eat now. But there is this desire of using history and time to give it another meaning.
But also, I think you talk in the book about a certain nostalgia
Yeah,
for that socialist period.
nostalgia that
And
needs to-
irony, I mean.
Exactly, needs to be filtered through irony. The Secta restaurant is an example of that. We have somebody in the back.
Yeah, in the back.
I just wanted to say that this accent is from Poland,
Oh,
and I'm very grateful for this. My friend brought me here, and I just never looked at Polish cuisine from your perspective, and it just opened up my eyes so much. And I have two questions. One is, what's your favorite dish in Polish cuisine? And another one, where can I find a list of restaurants you love so that I can go when I visit?
first question, żurek.
Żurek.
Oh, yeah, sure, it's wonderful.
I don't know why.
I love it too.
It's wonderful.
I love it. Second question, on purpose, I haven't done that because I'm doing ethnographic work. And you don't want to say one chef, oh, you're my favorite, and tell the other,
Got it.
not so much. So,
But you know, there are a lot of recommendations in the book.
Yeah, I kind of
implicit.
looked at it and I can find my way. Thank you so much for this wonderful work.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, I was wondering, hello.
Hey.
I was wondering if you had talked to any kids, and what is the perspective of kids? Do they have a sense of foods that, or food habits that are, that have been
So-
framed as traditional, or have symbolic value, or that come from far past
No,
or near
I
past?
must say I haven't done work on traditions. For that, Zosia Boni has done really, really good work on how discussions about desserts for children, especially in school, has become a very hot topic. But I haven't done interviews with children. I already had a hard time talking to adults. My Polish, it's quite limited. I can understand more than I can speak, but children, I was like, oh no. That's where I drew the line.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for this incredible talk. I'm really excited to actually dig into the book and see all the connections. Something I'm really interested in is Polish American immigrants and their experience. So I kind of have a two-part question. Earlier you mentioned Vietnamese communities and Ukrainian communities. I was interested in seeing if you experienced how immigration affects Polish food in Poland, and then also how you potentially have seen this elevation of Polish cuisine with Polish communities in America.
So the first question, no, it doesn't influence Polish food. So people go to the Vietnamese restaurant or to the Georgian restaurant. The
Yes,
Georgian,
yes.
it's also another huge culinary community in Poland. But you wouldn't see those cuisine, those flavors, those spices influencing Polish cuisine. There might be the more upscale restaurants that tries to do fusion. At home, no. Zero, absolutely not. As to Polish tradition in the US, it was not the main focus of my book, but I have, been around. For instance, there is Apotek in Pittsburgh that comes to mind as a very interesting take on contemporary Polish food here. But I haven't focused my attention on Polish American cuisines. That would deserve its own ethnographic study.
Any other questions or comments?
I just want to say one more thing.
Yeah.
I would love to hear your take on Polish pączki, because it's a hit, among my American or any other friends from another country.
I love them, and I have my favorite pączki places in Warsaw where I go. For those who know, pączki are sort of a fried dessert.
It's a jelly donut.
Jelly donut, yeah.
It's a donut.
Covered
But better than an American jelly
with,
donut.
with an icing. It can have different flavors inside.
It can
but
have candied orange peel.
yeah, that and the desserts with the fresh blueberries.
Oh, the blueberries.
Yeah.
But they're not blueberries, they're bilberries,
They're bil-
actually.
yeah.
They're wild. Yeah.
Those are, of course.
They're wonderful. Yeah.
Well, first of all, thank you for this fabulous discussion. I feel like I'm just way more excited about the book. I mean, I was excited, but now I'm more. I have a question about parallels and comparisons. Because earlier, I think Barbara mentioned something that's very important, which is heritage, even though heritage making is the making is more interesting than what actually it wants to, it is. But this process of heritage making and kind of trying to rediscover tradition and all of that, do you find, of all the areas that you studied the culinary culture so far, do you see parallels in
Yes,
other countries?
Absolutely.
And do you see parallels on comparisons of the reasons that drive this trend?
Yes, absolutely. I'm actually working now with the European Institute for the History and Cultures of Food on a new collection on food heritage that deals precisely with this. So we have cases from Africa, from China. China just had the tea culture recognized by UNESCO. So yes, it is everywhere. And it's everywhere because of the visibility that food has taken in public discourse all over the world. I mean, again, the cosmopolitan circulation of values and images, it's very important. You know, what slow food was doing in Italy in the 80s happened here in the 2000s, and now it's sort of all over the place because there is this circulation. China is an interesting case because at first they were really, really focused on dishes, a little bit like the idea of the canon, and they were more interested in provincial specialties. Only recently the government has sort of embraced the UNESCO approach to heritage, and they managed to get the tea tradition in it. There is also this desire of drawing attention to one's national culinary traditions for many reasons, economic reasons, cultural prestige reasons, but also tourism. There is the idea, if you highlight, you know, food specialties, there are people that travel for food, which is a new category of tourism that will come. And these people are people that are ready to pay, and they travel well. So it's very interesting for a national government to sort of also attract those people.
If I may add, you know, coming back to plums, that actually in the case of one of these towns that got the designation, I found it very interesting that they have a prune tourist trail between, well, I have a thing with plums, so okay. A prune tourist trail between local plum orchards and fruit kilns. There are 677 fruit kilns in this region, all designed and constructed by local people in a style adapted to the local terrain. The oldest is 100 years old. I'm signing up. I think I mean, really, that's incredible. That's incredible. And the thing is that, in a way, I think what that does is to leverage a certain continuity of cultural culinary practice, to leverage it in a way that makes it into heritage. It didn't invent it, but by that kind of, by whether it's a museum or a tour, a heritage trail, a festival, what it's done is to convert something that you might have taken for granted, that might have been second nature, and you have, in a sense, applied a set of practices to it that now nothing is ever born heritage. That's the point. Nothing ever starts out as heritage.
Yeah.
It has to become heritage, and this is a wonderful example. What can I say? So unless there's another burning question or brilliant comment, I think we're going to thank Fabio.
Thank you.
Thank you for this wonderful book.
Thank you everybody for coming and also for the conversation. Really, really.
And the book is for sale, and I think Fabio could be persuaded to sign it, and you have to sign mine, for starters.